Hello, I'm Dr. Patrick Hwu. I'm president of SITC and also president and CEO of the Moffitt Cancer Center in Tampa, Florida. And today we are very honored to have Dr. Adekunle Odunsi as our guest. Dr. Odunsi has been a member of SITC for many years and is on our board of directors. He's an expert in immunotherapy and vaccine therapy for cancer, and he became the University of Chicago Medicine Comprehensive Cancer Center Director on March 1st of this year. Dr. Odunsi is internationally recognized for his discovery and innovation in oncology. He comes to Chicago from Buffalo, New York, where he served as Deputy Director at Roswell Park Comprehensive Cancer Center. He also served as Executive Director of the Center for Immunotherapy and Chair of the Department of Gynecologic Oncology at Roswell Park. Dr. Odunsi received his medical degree from the University of Ife in Nigeria and his PhD from the Imperial Cancer Research Fund Laboratories and MRC Weatherall Institute of Molecular Medicine, John Radcliffe Hospital in Oxford, United Kingdom. He completed his residencies in obstetrics and gynecology at the Rosie Maternity and Adam Brooks Hospitals, University of Cambridge in the UK, and Yale University School of Medicine in New Haven, Connecticut. His fellowship in gynecologic oncology was at Roswell Park Comprehensive Cancer Center in Buffalo, New York, where he joined the faculty in 2001. Adekunle, welcome. Thanks so much for being here today.
Thank you very much for having me, Patrick.
Can you share a little bit about your background? What originally drew you to science and medicine?
My background is actually a little bit of a long journey. I started out in Nigeria in medical school. And while I was in medical school, I took some classes in immunology. And I remember one class that really struck me, which was on the generation of antibody diversity. At that time, this whole concept of clonal expansion of B cells was very popular, and it just fascinated me. And I went on to study this in more detail. And as I advanced through my career, I just found myself drawn more and more into this area. So immunology for me started way back from medical school. And when I gravitated towards cancer research, it was very clear to me that this was going to be a powerful way to deal with cancer as well.
What excited you to go into medicine? Were your parents in medicine, or did you have a specific high school teacher that really inspired you?
Actually, my parents were teachers, and they inspired me a lot. So I was inspired first by my parents, and then just by the nature of the environment. At that time, one of the prevalent challenges in Nigeria, as in any tropical country, is the issue of malaria. So a lot of kids were sick all the time from malaria. Unfortunately, some passing away from malaria, and even issues of dehydration were very common. So I saw those issues right from early parts of my life, and I was drawn into trying to do something to try and help those who suffer. At that time, infectious disease primarily was my focus.
Very interesting. What were your opportunities there in Africa?
So there were a lot of opportunities, especially in the sense that there was a lot of need. So think about it. Even as a medical student, you rotate in rural hospitals where there are no significant services, qualified personnel. And even as a medical student, you begin to, I recall even in the operating room, in the emergency room, I was taught to stitch injuries and so on and so forth. And as a medical student, you rapidly become second assist, sometimes first assist at the time of surgery because of the limitations of personnel. All of those experiences actually created opportunities in terms of training and also to be able to help people, especially living in rural communities.
Do those experiences from your time in Africa influence you now as head of a comprehensive cancer center and what your plans are? Tell us about how that has influenced your thinking.
That's a great question, because the experiences that I had in Africa, along with experiences in the United States, and frankly, experiences around the world, point to issues in healthcare disparities that we need to address. We need to address it locally within our communities, we need to address it regionally, and we need to address it globally. So those experiences from way back in Nigeria allows me to see opportunities to improve on access to healthcare. So for example, we are located in Southside Chicago. It's a very diverse community, and we have the challenge of access to healthcare. So the question is, how can we tackle this? So it's front and center in my mind in terms of trying to help solve this problem so that our community, folks right in our neighborhood, can have access to comprehensive health care. And I think if we're able to tackle this in one locality, whether it's in Chicago or in Tampa, Florida, it could become a model for how we then extend that model across the country.
Oh, that's very important. And we certainly appreciate your contributions in SITC to co-lead our diversity and inclusion task force, along with our Vice President, Dr. Alicia Emmons. So thanks so much for your help there. Tell us what you think the roadmap is for this country and the world to try to level the playing field in terms of outcomes to diseases like cancer, as well as COVID, where we really saw huge disparities.
Yeah, I think that first of all, that's a great question. The roadmap has to include really stepping back and asking questions. How can we restore ability for all people, regardless of identity, background, to thrive in society? How can people realize their full capabilities in society? So it's a bigger question. And COVID, as you pointed out, really showed us that we have work to do. Of course, we made a lot of progress, and I'm very proud that University of Chicago has made a lot of progress, but there's work to be done. So we need to get together as a community and really begin to advocate and support efforts to bridge the gap between the underserved populations and others, so that they have access to some of the socioeconomic abilities that will allow them to gain access to adequate healthcare, education, and so on and so forth. So it's really in the context of a bigger national issue. And I think we need to be deliberate and really sit back and tackle not just relating to health, but I think it hinges on even education, provision of jobs, food security. All of those issues have to be on the table.
It is a really huge area that we can all participate in. What recommendations would you give to other SITC members and others in the field of tumor immunology for what we can do to try to level the playing field and start to make some of the changes that you feel are necessary?
one of the major recommendations obviously has to be for us to pay attention to making sure we provide opportunities to underrepresented minorities in medicine, in health sciences, in research, so that we can create a pipeline, a continuous flow of individuals who will be qualified to take on some of those things that you and I are doing right now. We need to essentially build a succession plan that is inclusive, that allows all people to have opportunity to be able to reach the full extent of their talent. So those types of programs have to start very early, from elementary to high school. So what kind of programs are we putting together, for example, for high school students? What kind of opportunities are we putting together for undergrads to rotate in labs or in hospitals, and medical students and graduate students for that matter? So all of these efforts in partnership with institutions that are devoted to minorities, I think will be very helpful. There are institutions in this country where underrepresented minorities are the majority in those institutions. And I think engaging those institutions could be helpful in terms of feeding that pipeline.
Those are great recommendations, Adekunle. Really appreciate those. The Moffitt Cancer Center, we've been deeply rooted in these efforts, and most recently have had an interaction with the Morehouse School of Medicine, where we're bringing on interns of theirs and trainees in their medical school to try to give them opportunities in cancer research. But we think these are extremely important initiatives, and thanks again for your help with SITC's initiatives in this space. Extremely important. Let's talk a little bit about your research and your time in Buffalo, New York. Number one, what did you think about the weather when you came from, I know you went to the UK in between, but you went from Nigeria, Africa to the UK to Buffalo, New York. I know Buffalo because my wife is from Buffalo. So it's a place that I try not to go during the winter if I can possibly help it. But what were your initial thoughts?
We actually made the transition from New Haven to Buffalo, New York. And one of the things we got hit with within the first few months was a major snowstorm. And we couldn't go out for like 48 hours. But Buffalo was a great place, great community, Roswell Park, great institution. We loved it. And but the weather becomes kind of secondary if you are having a good time. So we really had a great time in Buffalo. Even when we get 7 feet of snow, no big deal. It's like nothing happened, and life goes on as usual. And the city has developed very strong methods of plowing and making sure the city hardly shuts down when there are major snowstorms. So great experience overall in Buffalo.
Great. Are you a Bills and Sabres fan, or are you going to transfer now to the Chicago teams?
I'm still Buffalo Bills and Sabres. Bills, when you live in Buffalo for that long, we were there for 22 years, you got to be a Bill fan. So I'm still go Buffalo.
Okay, what do they call the fans? Something like the Bills Mafia or something like that? Is that what they call them? The Bills fans.
They are the most loyal fans. Even when we are losing every game, we stand behind our team.
Well, they've been good lately, so hopefully this season they'll do well. Just not quite as well as the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. That's what we hope. But they do play December 12th against each other. A lot of family come down for that. Tell us about some of your research at Roswell Park, because you're very well known for all of the research that you did with vaccines and antigens. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so the research that we did at Roswell Park took its life when we made the initial observation regarding how high infiltration by T cells led to better outcomes in ovarian cancer patients. So we went on a search, on a journey, asking the question, what are the targets of immune recognition in ovarian cancer? And, multiple efforts for years. And then we came down to the conclusion of focusing on the family of cancer testis antigens, of which NY-ESO-1, as you know, is one of the major ones, probably the most immunogenic tumor antigen. So we therefore focused on NY-ESO-1 as the prototypic antigen for cancer vaccine trials. And what that did was to allow us to ask several questions about the nature of vaccine-induced immune responses in humans and specifically in ovarian cancer patients. What is the nature of this immune response? For how long do they persist? What are the mechanisms of escape from immune attack, and so on and so forth? So we spent years answering those questions and really understanding some of those mechanisms of immune non-responsiveness. And then we transitioned to adoptive cellular therapies because it became very clear that you need large numbers, especially for patients who have chemotherapy refractory or resistant disease, that you need large numbers of T cells to really mediate tumor regression. And so we created the capabilities to manufacture in-house and capabilities to make our vectors in-house. And that allowed us to begin to develop different strategies of manipulating T cells for adoptive immunotherapy. So those were the kinds of research that we were doing. And then more recently, also strategies to directly reprogram the ovarian tumor microenvironment, again, in an effort to minimize both innate and adaptive immune resistance.
That's very interesting. Patients with ovarian cancer, it spreads mostly intraperitoneally. They do really well with chemotherapy for a while, and it seems to help them live longer, but it often comes back. And so what role do you think immunotherapy is going to have for them? What role do you think it plays now? And where do you think the most exciting research is to try to get them long-term durable survival?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's something that we've thought about a lot. So I think at the completion of their frontline therapies, as you pointed out, they do well with surgery, chemotherapy. There's a subset of patients that benefit very well now from PARP inhibitors, and those patients do well. Again, there is evidence of PARP resistance or PARP failure. Some patients then relapse even while on maintenance therapy with PARP inhibitors. So ultimately, I think we need to mobilize the immune system, either along with the use of PARP inhibitors or even alone, whereby patients who are in remission could actually somehow be vaccinated in order to minimize the risk of relapse. And we've actually tested this concept in a couple of clinical trials, and we see signals that, in fact, you can prolong the time to relapse. Obviously, our trials were not randomized trials, but compared with historical controls, you can see evidence of prolongation of time to relapse in patients who receive vaccination following completion of their frontline therapies. So for patients who relapse, then the question is, what kind of therapies are we going to deploy at that point? Obviously, several studies now on immune checkpoint inhibitors have demonstrated only limited or modest success in ovarian cancers. So Our group and others are looking at strategies to enhance the efficacy of immune checkpoint inhibitors via combination approaches. So those are ongoing studies for patients who then, who experience relapse. And that is also a place where adoptive cellular therapies could have a role. So I think if you think of the natural history, evolution of ovarian cancers from primary diagnosis to relapse, I think immunotherapy has a place at every step of that journey. But the question is going to be to come up with approaches that will have very limited toxicities for our patients as they go along that journey so they can continue to enjoy very good quality of life.
Now, as you know, the COVID vaccine came from tumor immunology. Dr. Ugur Sahin, who we also had on a fireside chat, with his very powerful RNA technology for vaccines. Do you think that the RNA vaccines, which they started working with cancer early on, do you think that may play a role one day, the RNA vaccines for ovarian cancer?
I think there's the possibility some of the early versions of RNA vaccines, as you know, in cancer, were not very effective. But I think the technology has improved a lot, and we saw that with the COVID vaccine. So I think it's time to go back to the drawing board and ask the question: can we make RNA vaccines more effective in cancers? And what kind of targets? What are the targets what are we going to target in cancers? And the target may be different for different cancers and so on and so forth. But clearly the platform is powerful. And I think it's imperative to go back to the drawing board and begin to ask the question regarding how best to use it in the context of cancer.
Well, let's talk about targets for a second. You were targeting NY-ESO-1, which is a cancer testis antigen that's shared amongst patients. Although, depending on how you target it, you may still have to look at HLA matching based on if you're using the TCR or not. What do you think is the most important antigens for ovarian cancer? Is it cancer testis type antigens, differentiation antigens that are shared, or do we have to find the mutations that are there and go after the mutations as antigens in the ovarian cancers?
I think I almost can say all of the above, but I think the mutational antigens are going to be important. But as you know, in ovarian cancer, the mutation burden is actually quite not as dramatic, not as huge as you find in melanomas or lung cancers and so on and so forth. So some of the studies that we've done when we try and look for mutational neoantigens that are potentially immunogenic using some very strict criteria, we find very few. For the shared antigens, however, I think the family of cancer testis antigens are still very attractive because they are not expressed in normal tissue. They become aberrantly expressed in many tumor types, including ovarian cancers. The only normal tissue that expresses them is the adult male testis in many instances. And so the cancer testis antigens, I think, remains a family of targets that could be widely applicable to a broad population of patients. Whether you are talking vaccines or you are talking adoptive cell therapies, they are still individualized to some extent, but you actually can use a general strategy compared with the use of mutational antigens. But again, there are patients where mutational antigens might be the best, or other forms of neoantigens might be the better approach for them versus the shared antigens.
Ovarian cancer is also unique in some ways because although it can spread in the blood, it starts essentially, from what I understand, on the fallopian tubes and spreads throughout the peritoneal cavity initially. And so there's a lot of physical spread of that. What's your thoughts about the role of debulking surgeries, second look surgeries, as well as the role of intraperitoneal administration of immune cells versus intravenous administration of immune cells?
Tumor debulking surgery is still one of the main aspects of the treatment of ovarian cancers. However, the paradigm has shifted a little bit over the last 10, 15 years, where we are doing more and more neoadjuvant therapy prior to tumor debulking surgery. This has significant effects in the sense that patients are less sick instead of undergoing these radical major surgeries. Now the tumor shrinks, and then you can do less invasive surgeries for these patients. So that's one major paradigm shift. There came the era of the use of intraperitoneal chemotherapy, which is still a viable option, but there hasn't been as much adoption of that approach as potentially it could be, but the data clearly shows that IP chemotherapy improves both progression-free and overall survival in ovarian cancer patients, but it's accompanied by significant toxicities. So there hasn't been very widespread acceptance of this method of treatment. In terms of immunotherapies, there are a lot of things we can do intraperitoneally. For example, we have a proposed study where we'll be using direct intraperitoneal delivery of an armed oncolytic virus, oncolytic vaccinia virus, that is armed with a CXCR4 antagonist. We've tested, different oncolytic viruses, including oncolytic marabavirus, oncolytic adenovirus, oncolytic vaccinia virus, and because the peritoneal cavity is the local tumor microenvironment, you can imagine you can directly deliver an oncolytic virus into the peritoneal cavity. The preclinical models indicate that it's feasible. You have almost complete regression of tumor in many instances, and you can imagine using that in a clinical trial. We anticipate that this will be effective in the clinic. With regards to delivery of T cells, for example, directly into the peritoneal cavity, we've tested it a few times. We ourselves do not have data on things like T cell persistence in those circumstances, but there are others who are looking at this right now.
Tell us about what's unique about the microenvironment of ovarian cancer, because it's spread throughout the peritoneal cavity. I know there's a lot of different kinds of macrophages, for example, in the peritoneal cavity. Tell us about what the unique challenges are to the microenvironment of the peritoneal cavity and what you're dealing with advanced ovarian cancer.
So I think the peritoneal cavity is a unique environment, and I have to, and I say this because at one point we actually just took healthy peritoneal cavity of mice and scrape cells or collect peritoneal washings in the operating room and ask the question, what kind of cells do you find in the peritoneal cavity? These are non-tumor bearing patients, healthy, having surgery for benign disease. And when you interrogate the cells from healthy subjects, most of those cells, first of all, are myeloid cells. The phenotype is more, like myeloid cells, macrophages. And interestingly, many of those cells from healthy subjects actually have suppressive phenotype and attributes if you co-culture them with autologous T cells from the same patient. So that suggests to me that the peritoneal cavity is very protective of immunologic insult, because where do the ovaries live? They live essentially in the peritoneal cavity, and they are crucial for reproduction. So this is just a speculation that in the process of protecting the reproductive organs within the peritoneal cavity, the body has taken extra steps to make that environment as immune suppressive as possible in order to avoid immune attack against the ovaries. So what we find is that the immunosuppressive network in ovarian cancers is very extensive. It's almost like the textbook, every possible mechanism of immune suppression, whether it's TGF-beta or MDSCs or Tregs or fibroblasts or just name it. It's like the textbook of immunosuppressive network. So you have to deal with all of this if you're going to have successful immunotherapy against ovarian cancer.
So how do we deal with all of those things? Do we give some Cytoxan to get rid of the Tregs and maybe activate the macrophages? If you activate the macrophages with anti-CD40, of course you could block the TGF-beta, but are they? Can you induce those macrophages and to be stimulatory if you activate them? What is you're up against a lot with that inhibitory microenvironment, but what do you think the most important things are to do to combine with your T cells or vaccines?
So that's a great question, and something that we've been thinking about. So if you think about it, you almost have to combine like 6 or 7 drugs or approaches, which, as you can imagine, will be very toxic to patients. So are there some critical pathways that regulate or that are significant, dominant pathways that are significant in terms of the general immune suppressive network? And so if we can identify these pathways in general, then maybe engineering techniques so that when you engineer a T cell, you take some of those elements into account so that the T cell is resistant to immune suppression. Maybe we engineer T cells to traffic more efficiently. Maybe you need vascular normalization with bevacizumab, which is a standard of care for ovarian cancer already. So I think for us to put 6 or 7 things together is going to be difficult. I think we're going to have to utilize some form of genetic engineering in our delivery systems.
Well, Kunle, your work is so exciting. Now you've come to the University of Chicago, a really wonderful cancer center. I was an advisor there for many years. And you have all this work to do there. How are you going to balance things now? You have this really exciting ovarian cancer research to do. Are you still seeing patients? And what are you going to do with your administrative role? Tell us about a bit about the balance of what you're going to be doing.
First thing I would say is I think we need more than 24 hours in a day. If you can fix that problem. But I think the key is to have very strong teams around you. Everything I describe comes from our group, a team of dedicated folks that work with me. And I acknowledge and appreciate, their efforts. So I think just finding the right people to surround you is what is key here. So on the lab side, we have the right people to continue to keep the flag flying with all of the things that we were doing at Roswell Park. And some of them actually, many of them actually were able to relocate with me to Roswell Park. From Roswell Park. Then on the administrative side, very strong team within the Cancer Center to help and support issues relating to administration. On the clinical side, very strong clinical team. I still see patients, and especially in order to be able to maintain and continue with our clinical trials, I think there's just so much to be done with regards to taking innovative discoveries from the lab to the bedside. And the goal is to enhance all of this within the University of Chicago Comprehensive Cancer Center. I mean, you've served on the EAB for a long time. Thank you. And it's a very strong place, very exceptional scientists and clinicians, and there's significant opportunity to integrate and bring our basic science discoveries along the translational continuum to continue to help cancer patients with essentially ovarian and other cancer types.
That's wonderful. And I know that the University of Chicago is an outstanding place with amazing team members, including Dr. Tom Gajewski, who was a SITC president and is a wonderful person. So I'm sure you're going to partner with him a lot. But you have an excellent team there, and now they're all the more stronger with a wonderful leader like you, Adekunle. Adekunle, we also want to thank you you co-led recently an online discussion that we had with the Asian and Pacific Islander community in SITC, and talking about leadership in medicine and the perceived ceiling that many of us in minority sectors feel in terms of entering medicine, but then having issues when it comes to moving up in leadership. And thank you for co-leading that discussion with the Asian and Pacific Islander Initiative. Tell us what you feel needs to happen for people of all areas of society to move up in terms of in all of businesses, but also medicine and research and universities. What do we need to do there?
I think one of the main first steps is to acknowledge that this is something that we need to tackle as a society. And I think more and more there's that acknowledgement, and to be deliberate about how we go about tackling the issue. So for us at the University of Chicago, for example, we are creating a culture whereby we are able to, create a diversity, equity, inclusion program deliberately, so that we can build a culture that is inclusive, that tackles even from the area of recruiting faculty, retaining faculty, and diverse staff, as well as medical students and scientists. So we need to pay attention to our recruitment, our retention, and also create a culture of inclusivity at all levels, from the lowest rung of the organization to the highest level. If we are not deliberate about it, I don't think we're going to make significant progress. So, for example, if you need to, do a search for a faculty to make sure DEI representation is at the table, instead of us just throwing up our hands saying we can't find anyone, have we actually made the best effort possible to try and identify individuals who might be able to compete in the pool? This is not to favor one set over the other, but to give them opportunity to present as candidates for these opportunities, especially at the higher levels of the organization.
Wonderful. So you're saying that we really need to be very deliberate, intentful, and organized, and we'll make a difference.
Yeah, I think we need to do all of that, to be deliberate, to be intentional, to think about it, because if we do things, as business as usual, we're unlikely to be able to make progress. So I will encourage giving consideration to DEI issues as a fabric, as all parts of the organization, whether we're thinking of the clinical aspect, research, and we talk to our programs here at the University of Chicago, that DEI should permeate every program, everything that we do.
Diversity, equity, and inclusion. That's what you're saying, yeah.
Yes.
Wonderful. All right. So tell us, you've been in Chicago now for just a few months, and COVID lockdowns have just lifted recently. So have you found some nice restaurants and music venues? I know Dr. Gajewski is taking me some nice blues music venues there in Chicago. Have you found those yet?
Well, COVID has not helped. So I think I've only been to one restaurant, actually two now, because the city just relaxed the lockdown rules. So, but the two that have been are spectacular, absolutely amazing. So I'm looking forward to finding more restaurants and really ability to enjoy the city. It's a vibrant city, and I'm looking forward to my time here.
Well, we love being in Chicago, and SITC's band, the Checkpoints, we play there every year, as you know, at Buddy Guy's, and we can't wait to get there again. Hopefully next June, we'll be there.
Come on, come to Chicago. We'll be happy to have you.
Well, Adekunle Odunsi, Director of the University of Chicago Comprehensive Cancer Center and SITC Board of Directors member, thank you so much for spending the time today with us. It's been very enlightening.
Thank you so much, Patrick. It's really, really a pleasure to have been able to participate in this discussion.